Today, I'm going to try using virtualization to get the specialty software off this system into a newer host, so that way if something were to happen like this motherboard dies, I don't have to go out and buy specific hardware, and I can use virtualization to easily move it to a newer host. For the example I'm going to be working with today, this is an old Dell system built by some custom vendor that took a Dell Office PC and then attached a few more hardware devices to it so it can chime bells on the hour every hour, synchronize with GPS, and just runs a special piece of software within what I believe is Windows XP. Now, the good thing with this use case is Bell software doesn't really have to be updated. There's no reason for Bell software to be needing a newer version, but unfortunately the vendor wants quite a bit of money to replace a PC like this. So for this application, I thought it might be easier to try to replace it with virtualization so that hopefully this system being dead doesn't require us to buy a whole new system and we can just replace it with newer hardware. And hopefully this would be an interesting journey to watch as I try to figure out what's going on in the system, emulate the hardware in a virtual machine, and then try to do pass-through of some of these special devices they have added on this system. So let's first start off by taking a look at the system as I was given it. It looks like I was just given kind of a pile of all the different hardware devices, like some keyboards and mice that are pretty generic and some speakers. But it looks like they also have some slightly more specialty hardware. First of all, it has a remote to control it. Not sure exactly what the remote does. And a little IR receiver over serial. Because this system has a serial card they added to it, so that way it can communicate with serial devices. The other thing it has is a USB MIDI device. So it looks like it's USB on one end and then these MIDI connectors which likely connect to the actual audio outputs. I'll have to kind of test it and see exactly how the software can be configured, as well as some desktop speakers that use a 3.5 jack on it. And mostly this is a nearly 2-decade-old Dell desktop without anything really special inside. It's old hardware, it's slow, and unfortunately these systems as they get older are harder to find replacement parts online if you want an exact part, and seem to have more likelihood to fail because components only last so long. Looking at this device itself, it looks like it has a couple labels to tell you where to plug things in, a couple of special audio cards for an audio output, and 2 serial ports they've added via card. The other thing I got handed with this hardware is its internal hard drive, which hopefully is still good and will be able to pull the OS off of it. From some experience I had working with this system a long time ago, I believe this system is running Windows XP. And I've played with it in hypervisors, and generally it works pretty well to virtualize Windows XP, and hopefully pass-through works with all of these devices, but I'll have to play with that later. Otherwise, if I crack this system open and take a look inside, it's a generic Dell desktop. This is what you'd get 20 years ago if you bought a basic desktop PC, other than the fact that this vendor likely added these 2 cards to it. It's boring CPU. It's about as boring as it gets. But maybe for fun, I'll try just booting it up and see what happens on this system just for fun to see if maybe it does want to start up right now for me. Let's see if the system just happens to want to start up when I press its power button and boot. It has a little yellow light inside. Its fans turn on. That wasn't expecting it. I didn't think the system would boot. I thought this was dead from what I heard. Disk seek error, defaults loaded. I'm guessing that means that the internal battery is dead on this motherboard, because that's, unless they reset the BIOS and maybe it was acting weird otherwise. Even though this system does seem to boot, I still want to probably replace it with newer hardware because it's nearly 2-decade-old hardware that I'm guessing is more likely to fail than something newer possibly would be. The other thing that I want to do very early into this process, even though I possibly could try booting this system on its hard drive, is to make an image of this drive. And that way, no matter what else I do, I have a known state to go back to in case I make it worse. So I'm going to start doing that now on some other hardware I have, so I can have this image of a drive just in case I want to go back to my earliest potentially known good state or before I made it worse if I screwed something up. My preferred method for imaging drives like this is by booting into a live Linux USB, mounting my network storage NAS on the system, and using ddrescue to copy all the files on the drive onto the NAS. And I like using ddrescue as it's generally pretty good with dealing with drives that have failing sectors, like this system might possibly have, And it also works just fine if it is a perfectly good drive, so it will make an image of the drive anyways. Oftentimes, if a drive has failing sectors like this older one might, it will get as much as it possibly can, which, depending on where the failed sectors are, might mean it's more than enough data for it to boot just fine into its OS. I just picked Fedora Linux for my live distro I'm going to be using right now. Any Linux distro works fine, and I'm just going to get that file copy running now. And here's that dd rescue command I'm using right now to copy the internal drive, which happens to be SDA in the system, to the image. And luckily, because it's an 80 gig drive, it's probably not even going to take that long to make the full image of the disk. Well, I just came back to my imaging computer to see if it was done making an image, but unfortunately it looks like it's crashed. Nothing's responding, no display output. That's annoying. I will say, one cool thing of DD Rescue, and I did do it, is you can make a log file of how much data has been pulled off the drive, so if the system does crash, you can continue from where you left off, and not have to start again, which is great for big hard drives where you might be doing 10-hour copy jobs, for example. But time to restart Fedora, and maybe this old 7th gen system I got for free somewhere is not stable, and that's why I ended up with it for free. So on the second try, my image job is finally finished, so now I have an image of the included hard drive from this system, so I don't have to worry about using it and possibly making the state not bootable, and can revert to that original state if I want to. I also plan whenever I use that image to either make a snapshot of it or copy the image, so then I can keep that original image and never modify the image and always go back to it. But since it looks like the system actually boots when I thought it was completely dead, I might as well try turning it on. And my thoughts are running its internal OS might tell me some information about the OS it's running, which might make it easier to set up a virtual machine for it, and possibly just learn more from its application. While I could probably figure it out looking at the drive and stuff, it's easier if it's willing to just boot up and tell me. I think this error here, diskette drive seek failure, is because it's set up to use a floppy drive by default in the BIOS, even though it doesn't exist in this system, and that little CMOS battery is dead. And after taking a look at the age of this hardware, that makes a lot of sense to me. So we'll see what happens and if it actually wants to boot into an OS right now. And it looks like we got Windows XP on this system. Oh, fun. It's been a while since I've used XP. Looks like found new hardware is running, such a familiar experience. We can open Task Manager and take a look at our system in here. I'm actually just curious what hardware this has in it. Windows XP Service Pack 2. This isn't even Service Pack 3. It has a Celeron 430 at 1.8. Ooh, a gig of RAM. This is not a screamer of hardware. And it looks like it's immediately opening this little Bells app, which is what's supposed to do. Yeah, it looks like it has different chimes at different hours. It plays, looks like MP3 files. That's cool, but when it comes to making my virtual machine, from what I've seen working with this system, it should be easy. It's fairly easy to do Windows XP hardware to virtual machines. I've done it a good amount of times in the past with relatively minimal issues and gotten reliable systems out of it. This USB hardware here should be able to work with USB pass-through in my hypervisor of choice, so hopefully that just works. And the only other thing that leaves behind is the serial ports, which from what I've heard for things like the remotes aren't needed by the person who is using the system, so I possibly could just forget them. But the other opportunity would probably be to use a USB to serial adapter that's compatible with Windows XP. Service Pack 2 might be kind of annoying though. And then pass that USB device to here, because while it is a PCI device that I might be able to technically pass through, that's a lot more annoying than doing USB pass through if I possibly can. So it looks like this works. I'll have to see exactly what hardware it works, but generally XP works pretty well in virtual machines. So I don't think I'm going to be having that many issues working with it or turning this system off. So let's turn this off for now and start working on building this into a virtual machine. So if this was my system I was setting up a virtual machine for my use, I'd just toss it on Proxmox, likely with some of my other VMs, and use it there. But the issue I have with just doing that is I'm setting this up somewhere where I'm not going to be the one accessing it, and I don't want to be tech support more than I have to. And this makes me very inclined to use a more common kind of Windows-based solution, because while Windows and Linux you can debate over ease of use, people are a lot more familiar with using Windows and dealing with it. So maybe running something like Hyper-V or VirtualBox on top of Windows would mean I have to get called for tech support less often. We can debate that in the comments below if you'd like, but that's my initial thought, so I'm very tempted to try that. So my mentality going into this is we're going to take a Windows, likely 11 system, run VirtualBox on top of it, see if it's happy doing those USB pass-throughs I want to do, and I'm pretty sure VirtualBox works just fine with Windows XP systems, so using the VirtualBox guest edition shouldn't be any issues, and essentially all the hardware of XP should work just fine. And for anything that has issues, if we have USB pass-through, we can get more USB hardware, pass it through, and then don't have to deal with the virtual devices, which we'll see how that works on this system. So for my system that's going to be running this VM, I have a older 7th gen Pentium system that I'm going to try running the VM on. While it's far from a fast system, it's a whole lot faster than that old Celeron is. So there should be more than enough hardware to run Windows 11 on here, along with that VM for the Bell system, and hopefully work just fine on here. So here's my Windows 11 system. I got VirtualBox installed, and I've almost finished copying over that 80 gigabyte hard drive image. And now I'm going to run a command using VirtualBox manage to convert that IMG file into a VDI file that VirtualBox should hopefully like a lot more, because VirtualBox uses its own different file type that it likes to use for its internal media, so it's going to convert that 80 gigabyte file soon. So now I've got VirtualBox installed on the system, as well as the file converted to what VirtualBox should like. So my next question is, can I just get this system to boot up in a virtual machine? Let's try it out with VirtualBox. I used it a little bit back in the day, but it's been a bit since I've actually tried doing too much. So let's create a new VM. We'll call it Dell PC, and I can keep its files within. Actually, I've made a custom folder from all these files for this PC directly on the root of the C drive. And then the most noticeable thing is I'm not going to have an ISO disk because I have an existing hard drive I want to boot from. And I'm going to set everything to Windows XP, which should set it to use older devices that are more compatible with older versions. It's not going to be doing any automated hardware. I'm going to give it that same 1 gig of RAM that the original hardware has and 1 CPU, but Windows XP really doesn't need very much at all. And I'm going to use an existing virtual disk file that's going to be my Bell boot drive that I already have in this folder that I can choose and use. So I'll click Finish, and then I believe the settings here shows me a few more options for this system than I had in the initial setup here. So I can set it to only boot from the hard disk. Then again, it shouldn't matter with the other devices because I don't have them. I believe it sets things like chipset and stuff here to work whatever XP likes by default. Like, yeah, no secure boot, for example. Video memory, I don't care as long as I get an output that I can manage it with, and that looks fine. And I'm just going to do a quick glance through all these settings to make sure nothing looks odd. I may need to set up audio to do these speakers and stuff. I'm not fully sure exactly how audio will be configured in this final system. If it's going to be USB pass-through or that, and how I can make that work. So let's just hit OK and see what happens when I hit start. Well, that's interesting. It's been like 10-20 seconds since I started this VM, and I still see nothing. So I'm going to try doing a hard reset again and see if I can press. Oh, there it goes. Now this time it wants to show. It looks like it wasn't happy about some hardware change. So see if it starts Windows normally. Okay, maybe we'll try resetting it once more and see if there's anything I'm missing. And yeah, IDE controller, primary master, start it initially. It looks like it's stopping that countdown and it's doing it. When I see this in the past, what I've often seen doing this is this means it's loaded enough for some of the basic boot drivers, but it doesn't have the driver for the rest of the disk. So it can show you these very early boot process things, but not the rest of the drive. And what I do when I see this is I go and start editing the hard disk controller, as that sometimes can fix it. It looks like it's using the IDE controller, which my gut is the most compatible on here. Yeah, it looks like LSI. There's a SCSI controller, SAS, floppy, and a few more. Maybe try AHCI. I mean, from my knowledge of VirtualBox, the controller should be compatible. Maybe Windows XP doesn't like its controller being changed and isn't compatible with this new one. But I'm going to try these other controllers and see if it wants to boot with these other controllers. And maybe I'll get lucky with some of these other controller types. I'm just trying SATA now. I tried one of the SAS SCSI controllers, as possibly that'll work with Windows XP. Maybe I did something weird cloning it, but it's showing me that same message I've seen before, where it's counting down right now, but when I hit enter to start it normally, it freezes. I could try resetting it and using the safe mode, and maybe that will make things better. I'm sure running Windows XP on VirtualBox is possible, and I might play with it a little bit more off camera and just see if I can figure it out for my own sake. But the vibe I'm getting looking at this here is it's not quite as easy, and since I don't use VirtualBox that much, I don't know all the knobs to tweak to make it work, which makes me want to do Proxmox again, where I know a lot of those knobs much better than I know with VirtualBox. The disadvantage, as I said earlier, is other people don't know Proxmox quite as well, and it might take a little bit more configuration. And that's why I'm tempted to do something that's not super commonly done with Proxmox, but you can install it essentially with Debian as running it with a GUI OS on it, for example. And then that way I can have a fully usable GUI OS. So I can have a monitor plugged into it and say, hey, if you need to poke with it, here you go. Let's have it auto-launch, let's say Firefox, with the Proxmox web interface open. So hopefully that's a little bit easier for them than saying, oh, pipe this IP into some other computer in the network and all of this. And if we probably can leave it fully off the network or minimize what it does, that might make it a little bit simpler for this application. I'm going to put it on a different SSD so I can just go back to this XP install if I want to. But now let's see easy Proxmox usage and see if that possibly can solve my problem here. And after following the guide and fiddling around with some app certificates, this system now is a Proxmox host in addition to its Debian host that it was running as well. So I can log in using localhost, see it, and it's all on the same host that I manage it on. And I will give Proxmox credit. It's awesome that not only can you hack it and make it work, they give you a guide that goes over all the common issues and how to make it work, which is kind of awesome. But back to my problem at hand of trying to get this Dell PC running again. So I am going to follow essentially the same guide and methodology that I did in that previous video. I'll try to link it now of converting a hardware system to a Proxmox VM. So I'm not going to go into any detail now, but essentially I'm going to create a VM without a hard disk. Then I'm going to link this hard disk I'm going to make now. And then I'm going to set it to Windows XP and just see if it wants to boot for me. So let's get into creating a VM now. Hopefully this is going to be as painless as I am thinking it is for my previous Windows XP conversions. And I'm just going to call it Dell VM for now. I'm not going to have any drives in it because I am just using an existing hard drive, and I'm going to install the drivers likely later on, but I just need to make sure it boots first. Set it to Windows and XP. That changes a few defaults for other things. Everything looks very compatible here and essentially the oldest that you can get. I'm going to remove this disk because I'm adding my own drive later. Single CPU cores, what I got on those. CPU-wise, typically I do host unless I run into issues. I've seen some VMs where host caused problems on old OSs, but until I see that issue, my general rule of thumb is leave it at host. And I'm actually not going to give it a network device for now. I don't think the Dell thing needs network at all to communicate to anything, and really Windows XP, especially older service packs, should not be on the internet, so I think that's the safest way to go. I think the only true form of communication that VM's going to kind of need is going to be syncing time, which should be able to be done via that guest and host communication channel via that guest agent and not have to require the network or NTP at all, which should mean security is less of an issue because Windows XP now never has to touch the network. So the only thing really left is to move that QCOW2 file under the hood and attach it to the VM. And second try, now with slightly different disk configurations that maybe Proxmox will like. Windows XP, there it goes. It's trying. It got a lot farther than VirtualBox did, I think. Looks like it's starting up. Oh, it's complaining about activation. Oh, that's annoying. It's still taking its time to load everything in the VM. I don't know if its CPU's moderately being used or if it's just XP being XP. Hopefully I can convince it to just be happy with activation, because I don't want to give it internet. I don't think I can call the phone service anymore. Now I'm mostly curious if the Windows XP phone activation system even works. So let's try it. 36963. Well, I am extremely impressed. Microsoft will still activate Windows XP over the phone over 2 decades after it came out. That still surprises me. But we have another problem here with this system, which is the actual Carline Bell software, which makes the thing, which is the main reason this whole thing's happening, now is bugging about a serial number, which from the looks of it, this computer it originally has a computer ID that you have to tell their tech support, which gives you a serial number. I'm going to take a quick glance at the files to see if they happen to just store it somewhere in plain text, but that might be stopping this plan, unfortunately. And from first glance at this VM, there doesn't seem to be an obvious serial number I can find anywhere, and trying to convince applications to do things they're not supposed to do is beyond my abilities of working with programs. I'm sure someone could find a way to make this program bypass this serial number or find what type of number it's looking for and make it work, but that person's not me. The other thing that makes me a little bit more thoughtful that I could possibly do is somehow convince this system that it hasn't changed hardware. But that gets pretty tricky very quickly, as I'd have to fake a lot. I might try changing a few things, but I don't know what hardware change is actually tripping up the system and what it's okay about. I can change stuff like the model of CPU the system says it has available to it and possibly some other basic information, but it's still likely going to have a lot of the virtual machine information available to it. I still don't know how Windows XP and this Bell software determines that it's a new system. And that's getting quite a bit beyond what Proxmox is designed to do, as it's designed to run OSs that know they're in a VM and not try to hide the fact that they're in a VM for kind of debugging and testing purposes. And this is getting kind of beyond my ability. I'm going to do some Googling and come back and see if I can hopefully find a way to make it work, but we'll see for now. Well, back here with this old PC due to the issues I had with that licensing, and hopefully I can try to get a serial number from the existing software. Maybe it'll just tell it to me if I'm lucky. I don't know. The other thing I'm going to try to fix is hopefully that CMOS battery issue. I took a look at the existing CMOS battery, which is a standard CR2032 button bell sat battery, and it appeared to be dead with essentially no voltage. And seeing how this is a nearly 2-decade-old computer, which likely had its original battery, means what I probably want to do is enter setup on this board, configure the BIOS the way I want, unplug it and let it sit there for a bit and see if it resets the BIOS when it has no power. And if I'm right, it'll work just fine and won't show that error anymore. And it's kind of annoying that if you don't have anything in there, it halts boot. I've seen this a couple of times before in older systems. Well, unfortunately, my capture card doesn't seem to like the signal that a lot of BIOSes give out, like this one here. But essentially what I'm going to be doing is going into standard CMOS features and setting the drive A, which is the floppy drive, to non-existent. Halt on all but keyboard, I guess, is my best option, setting the date and time, and then likely going through everything else to see if there's any settings that I think would make sense changing for a system like this. The only other setting that I thought changing might help is the auto power on setting. So that way if the system loses power again, someone doesn't have to go manually push the button and it automatically turns itself back on. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to unplug it when it's well, I'm going to let it boot into Windows and then shut it down safely, but then I'm going to unplug it, let it sit there for a couple of minutes so it can drain all the capacitors, and if it boots just fine, the battery was the issue, and putting a new one in fixed it. Well, that's actually a really good sign. It gives me the serial number here, so I'm going to try punching that into the VM and see if I get lucky with that VM now. So now time to go shut down the system and figure out if that VM will work with that serial number. And I'm logged into my Proxmox system, starting up this XP VM again, and I'm really excited that it seems like it just gives me the serial number and hopefully works, especially after dealing with Microsoft on the phone for 20 minutes to get everything working. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. Stop it. And then I'm going to punch in that serial number I got from the other piece of hardware over there. Computer ID changed, likely because that QM is probably QMU's internal ID and probably it's set to 1. I have no idea if the name matters, so I'm just going to put something bogus in. I keep getting this message here after trying to use the serial number that I'm almost certain I copied correctly from the working system serial number. Maybe it's somehow like tied to this computer ID information here, so it won't work unless I have that correct, but I don't know. That's odd to me. I might work on this more later. I'm very tempted to just continue using the old computer because it seems to work. But let me give that old computer one more try and just make sure it boots up correctly with its CMOS battery fixed to make sure that was actually the issue and shut down the system. There might be more tweaking that I could possibly do on this node to get it working again, but also seeing that the old computer is alive, I'm really tempted to just stick with it. I already have an image if I want to try virtualization in the future or try it when I have more free time, because I'm a little cramped for time now. The other problem, the other issues that commonly fail on those systems can likely be replaced relatively easily without too many issues is my kind of thought. Like the hard drive is really easy to replace. I could put an SSD in it now, but I don't know. I can make an image on another 80 gig drive really easily if later on if I need to too with that hard drive image. Power supply is an easy swap and those fail reasonably often. Memory as well. Motherboard I'm hesitant to swap out just because it likely has that ID that the system's tied to and is what's causing all of these problems on this. I can probably find one on eBay for a reasonable price considering the cost of the replacement of the system is much more than an old motherboard for one of these systems is on eBay, but I'm still worried about getting the exact same issue moving it to a VM would be, but maybe since the CPU and model of the board is fine, but with a different serial number, it would still work. I don't know until I actually try something like that. And for the moment of truth, if the system actually boots the first time here, it says Dell right now as it did last time, but let's see if it starts booting into Windows or it bugs me for an F key. Oh! That's interesting. I really thought it would hold settings. If I press F2 to enter setup again, and look at probably the easiest to reset the time with the new battery. Maybe it has a hardware monitor. Going into that previous segment where I saw the serial number on this physical system and replaced the battery, I was so hopeful I'd not only have the system booting and working like it should be, but I'd also have a VM that I could use using that original serial number. But it turns out both of those just couldn't happen. Maybe the CMOS battery on this board is just broken in how it powers things? I measured it again on the board and it's showing voltage, so it's not shorted out. But every time I try it, it says CMOS checksum error defaults restored, which is not great. Now, the one, I guess, good news is if I leave a power cord plugged in, it seems to work just fine and keep working. So I guess put it on a UPS and hope the UPS just keeps working and this system will be fine. Unfortunately, though, after more of my testing and working with this system, I can't seem to figure out an easy way to get that Bell software working. I don't think there's support, which I normally call for something like this if it was supported and I wasn't trying to do things with VMs I probably shouldn't, is going to help me here, so I'm not even trying that option. And even though I have the serial number it seems to want, it doesn't activate, possibly because the ID changed on the system, or maybe I'm not giving it the right name and address that box also wants. I'm not sure. That's just weird to me. So I'm kind of annoyed that I could say, yeah, you could probably get the system to limp along if you leave it always plugged in, and if it does lose power, go into the BIOS and restore settings. The other thing I really hate with this system is that if you want it to set time correctly, you either have to use the GPS thing, of which I think I heard it failed from this person I got the system from, or you have to use NTP, which means plugging XP Service Pack 2, which almost certainly has some security vulnerabilities in it, into a network, which I really don't want to have to do. I was hoping this video would be a lot better of a, I fixed this story, and fortunately I got this system to run in a VM just fine. It's just DRM and licensing came to bite me and says I don't want to run anymore, which, that's annoying. I'm really happy Microsoft still activates XP in VMs like that. I'm extremely surprised they helped at all with that sort of situation and it worked. But I think I'm kind of reaching the end of the road here. While I think I've said it's possible, likely to crack the software and figure out what's going on under the hood here, that's not in the amount of time or knowledge I currently have to make something like that work. And I'm going to go back to the person who talked to me about this project with the unfortunate news of I don't have a good solution like I really thought I was able to get. Did I miss something, you guys think, here with a solution like this? Is there a step that could have done it? Is there some way of faking the hardware so that the DRM and that Bell software doesn't kick off and restore it? Let me know in the comments below. I really hope I'm missing some simple step, and it just, due to that, was the reason I can't get this box working again in a VM. And also, do you know about why the checksum or errors of this CMOS battery doesn't seem to get fixed? Because it really seems to be a CMOS battery issue, but I put a working battery in. The voltage appears to be correct. I don't know. This almost leaves more questions than answers, and I really sometimes don't like making videos where I don't have an actual solution, but I think it's still fun to see what the process is, and let me know in the comments below if you find that interesting for yourselves too. Looking forward to reading your comments, and hopefully I find a better solution to this system's problems one day, but unfortunately that doesn't seem to be today.